Hey everybody, welcome to the Sharpe Show. It is 7 p.m. on the East Coast, so you have to look at me. You didn't want to, but you have to. It's the rules. I'm here and very happy that I'm here. I have a guest, someone who I think you'll be very interested in hearing from, and I hope you will take a couple seconds to check him out. An author, an educator, an activist, and a self-proclaimed champion of freedom. And I love that part. James Keena, how are you?
I am excellent. How are you, Larry?
I'm doing great. I'm very glad you decided to come onto my show. You wrote a book. You've written several things, but the one thing that hit me, right, that came to me was your book, 2084. That, I mean, when I saw I actually saw, I think you have your publishing company actually put out a short video. And that I think is what got my attention more than anything. And you're basically saying that we're kind of in trouble right now.
Yeah, actually, the subtitle of the book is American Apocalypse. And
yes.
So the premise of the book is by the year 2084, America is actually at the point of another civil war. I'm going to call it the third civil war because I count the revolution against the British as the first. And then the second was obviously the one in the 1860s. But by 2084, the current animosity and toxicity in our culture has reached the point where we're no longer able to collaborate as a nation, and we're fractured and we're at war. It's a mystery novel because the novel actually centers around a family that is trying to avoid the conflict and the war, but it turns out they're actually so deeply involved that they're like the Ark of the Covenant, and their kids are kidnapped. They have no reason, no way to understand why. And so they're caught in an environment where all communication and infrastructure has basically broken down, and people are starting to live a nomadic existence in America. So they have to cross the country trying to find clues as to why their children were kidnapped. And in doing so, they encounter a lot of factions that are good factions, dangerous factions, but they learn clues along the way that, wow, we're really part of something much bigger that we had no idea we were a part of. And then by the end of the story, they have to make an apocalyptic decision that affects the fate of an apocalyptic world. And so it becomes very clear to them what's happened to America, why it's happening, and who's the cause of it.
So then when are we going to see the Netflix series?
Well,
I love that. Maybe, right? For those of you who want more information on James, please head over to his website, jameskeena.com. He has written other things too. I don't just want to pump this piece. He's written several things, but this is the one that kind of came to my mind. I want to go to why you picked 2084. I would push back and say, dude, it might be sooner than that. I mean, it's pretty bad now. I think some people might say more like 2034. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating, but you see my point.
Oh, absolutely. And, I picked it partly to echo George Orwell's 1984.
Got it. Okay.
Sort of present the reader with the theme and the mood of the book, that they would understand what was coming at them just by the very title of the book. It's very different than Orwell's book. It's not like a sequel to it or anything. But I would agree with your comment that things are happening a little faster than maybe I even anticipated, because I finished the manuscript in about January of this year, or last year, I mean. And that was before the COVID thing broke, and before all the violence in the summer, and before all the chaos around the re-election campaign. So what's happened this year has actually reinforced what I've written in the book, and probably sped up the timeline. If I had to do it all over again, I'd pick a sooner date, I think.
You might have done 34 after all as well. It's a couple comments. Jimmy says, we are preparing for self-sufficiency now. Jimmy's not waiting 60 years, man. He's waiting. He's jumping on it now.
Well, that's not an unreasonable thing to think, because when you look at what's happening in our society, it reminds me a lot, if anyone's familiar with the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror that happened after that French Revolution, where there was a group of elitists in society who decided that they were going to create their own perfect society, and to hell with anybody who was going to resist that. And so they brought out the guillotine, and they guillotined everybody who opposed it, then created literally a reign of terror, to the point where people would say afterwards that they literally devoured their own children in the French Revolution.
Right.
You're starting to see that today, not only with just the one riot on January 6th with the Capitol, but we had a whole summer of riots.
Right.
we've got our politicians who are supposed to be our leaders and the people that guide us in a healthy and safe direction are at each other's throats. Pelosi's ripping up Trump's State of the Union address. They've impeached Trump twice, and when he dies, they'll probably exhume his body and impeach him a third time.
Or at least yell at him.
And people are being deplatformed; they're being demonetized.
Sure.
It's the society is basically at each other's throat right now, and so it's not unreasonable to think some bad things could happen. And I say that the people tend to.
Connie says 2024. Connie, I don't think it's that bad. I mean, I don't think it's that bad. I think we got to at least 34. Give us a break, Connie. Come on, at least 34.
Here's the thing. I was going to talk a little bit about a thing called normalcy bias, where people, when there's a period of relative calm and prosperity, they think, wow, this is going to go on forever.
Sure.
But the truth in America is that every 20 or 30 years or so, something really traumatic happens to our society. Whether it was the example we had in 2020 with the COVID lockdown and the suspension of our civil liberties, or you go back to the Great Recession, you go back to the radical Islamic attack on our country, the Twin Towers, you go back to the Cold War with Russia, you go back to World War II, you go back to the Great Depression, you go back to World War I, you go back to the Civil War. We've never really gone more than 20 or 30 years without something terrible happening in this country that completely upends everything we were hoping for and everything we thought was stable in this country. And I think that's coming again. That's part of the premise of my book.
The thing you're bringing up is, we also always assume that we will survive it, right? Like we've been through tough spots. And I think probably in my lifetime, one of the hardest ones was probably the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, Watergate and Nixon. And that was pretty tough. We thought, oh my God, the world's ending. See, LA's on fire, right? I mean, that was kind of the thought process. But I think we thought we'd get through that, and we did. We got through it. There were scars and pain, but we got through it. And I think most people always think we're going to get through it. But this time, I'm not so sure. In other words, I think a lot of people are thinking more like what you're talking about, in that maybe this is as far as we can be pulled, right? Maybe there's a point that where this rubber band snaps. I think some people are concerned. I hope they're wrong, because I don't want your novel to come true, right? I don't want it to come true. I want to solve it. I want to save it. But what I used to think is that one savior would come, right? Bill Clinton will save us from everything because he plays the saxophone on TV. He'll be our savior. I was that idealistic youngster that I thought maybe somebody could do that. I'm no longer that youngster, but I still know it's us that has to fix it. But I'm not waiting for someone like that to do the job. I think we have to.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's no one person that's going to save us. I mean, a lot of people fell in love with Trump, but clearly he didn't save us, and he was never going to save us.
Yep, absolutely.
If you look at what's happening in America, there's a long trend, and I'd like to just articulate it for a couple of minutes, that's going in a very bad direction.
Okay.
It actually started in the first Civil War, when Lincoln, in order to preserve the Union, essentially made the North a totalitarian state. He suspended all its civil liberties then. He basically suspended the concept of states' rights. He started the momentum of a very powerful centralized government. Mm-hmm. Now you can argue about, was that a good thing, bad thing at that time? He probably had to do it, and it was probably necessary at the time. But the point is that the seeds were all planted.
Just to be clear, while it may have been bad, I do believe that Lincoln thought it was the right thing to do.
Yes, I agree with that. I agree with that, absolutely. He was a very passionate man. And I'm not saying any of this to criticize Lincoln. I'm just saying those seeds were planted by whatever historical necessity at that point in time. Since then, we've had a continuing evolution of bigger and bigger government. We had the 16th Amendment, which gave us the government the power to tax people directly. And if you think about the implications of that, and it's proven out over time, that gives the government essentially unlimited power. There's really nothing stopping that other than maybe some political pressure, but there's no constitutional stop to that anymore. And then came the Federal Reserve Act, where a national banking system was created, which essentially gave the federal government the power to create money at will. And
as it does very well, it keeps doing.
Absolutely. And then there came a Supreme Court case, which I think was very pivotal, which was the Wickard case, which essentially—
I don't think I know that one.
Well, it was during the Great Depression. In order to raise the prices of various food commodities, the government was restricting planting of this and interstate commerce to that, trying to bring the prices of food up so the farmers could be successful. So there was a farmer in Ohio named Wickard who wasn't even selling the food he was growing, but he was growing food for his own family. But it was against the rules at that time because the government didn't want that amount of food being produced. And so they told him he had to stop, and there was a Supreme Court case that eventually said that the federal government does indeed, through its power to regulate interstate commerce, have the power to tell that farmer in Ohio that he can or cannot grow food.
Wow. I'm glad you brought that. I've actually never heard of that before. That's amazing.
And so from that case, you really see, when you add it to the power to income tax, the power to print money at will, and the power to tell any farmer anywhere or any person anywhere what they can or can't do. And we saw a lot of that in 2020.
Yes, we did.
The federal government has extraordinary power from that. And then as time has gone on, you mentioned the 60s with Lyndon Baines Johnson's Great Society was another step up. And even prior to that, FDR's New Deal was another escalation in the size of the government. When Obama was in office, we had the Obamacare program, which took over 17% of the economy. I think as we go further into the Biden administration, we'll see further intrusions into elements of the economy. Yep. So what we have on our hands, my whole point is this: the whole trajectory over the period of 100 or 150 years has been to create a government that is so massive, so out of control, and so intrusive in our lives that something bad is going to happen.
Yeah, and I say the same thing, right? When you put people in desperate situations, they do desperate things, right? That's just what desperate people do. So when you start telling farmers, you can't grow, or you can't do, or you can't sell, or insert thing here, they do desperate things, right? When they feel it. The example I'll give is the terrible one of the people, shoveling snow in Pennsylvania, and then there are 3 people who are dead. People who are stuck, can't do anything, feel helpless, feel hopeless. And now any attempt to do anything makes me angry and I want to lash out. And I do something desperate. Now I have 3 dead people and no benefit to anybody at all. Just a bunch of sad loved ones is all that created. And nothing else was created from that. I see what you're saying. I guess the piece I would bring up, though, is the American people, as a general rule, we love a war on stuff. Like, as soon as something happens, we call it a war. And as soon as we call it a war, we then authorize the government in our head. I don't even mean constitutionally. I mean in Americans' head. Oh, well, it's a war, so we can do anything, right? It's a war on drugs, so we can put people in prison. We can seize their assets, civil asset forfeiture. We can do no-knock warrants, right? Because it's a war on drugs. Oh, it's a war on terror, so we can take away all people's rights. We can spy on our own people. We can bomb people without anything. Oh, it's a war on COVID. We can lock you in your home. We can make sure you don't go to your job. We can make sure kids don't go to school. It's a war on poverty, so we can make sure that you don't work. We can do all these things because it's a war. This has always been my fear, is that Americans are always afraid, and afraid Americans are our biggest enemy. There's no, I don't see another enemy from outside, crossing the border and invading and conquering our territory. I see us falling apart from inside because we're afraid.
I think that's true. More so recently. I don't think that was the original culture of America. When you think about what the people who came here had to do in order to create a living, I mean, they basically had a nation that they had to carve out of the wilderness and under very trying circumstances. And so we had
I'm agreeing with you. I think this is a relatively modern thing, and it reminds me almost of the Roman Empire. Right. If you look at the Roman Empire and the early empire, it's an aggressive empire trying to do things, trying to create the right reasons, trying to create the right everything, trying to create, precedent, everything that it could possibly do. Don't get me wrong, it was a brutal empire, but for its time, it was amazing. If you measure Rome with its contemporaries, it was amazing empire. But by the end, they were, lazy, laying around eating grapes. Right. I mean, they were falling apart by then.
But this is exactly why I pointed out that during the first Civil War, or the second one in 1860, when Lincoln was president, that some of the things he did set an extraordinary precedent for over-reliance on the federal government. I mean, it literally was a war. He had to save the Union. He had to deal with the South, had to deal with the slavery issue. So it was an extraordinary circumstance. But he used that extraordinary circumstance, like I said earlier, to suspend civil liberties. He actually had the first income tax during the Civil War in order to fund the Civil War. He had the first welfare system set up during the Civil War. So those seeds of an overreaching government were planted by Lincoln. And so when you look at even all the amendments after the Civil War, you start to see those amendments, instead of protecting civil liberties, are actually protecting the size and scope of the federal government.
Yeah.
And you see a growth in that power of the federal government to the point where what you said earlier is exactly true. We've reached the point now where when a crisis comes up, people just say, please, federal government, help us. Please, president, do something. That wasn't the original culture of our country, and that culture has shifted dramatically in a very bad way, I think.
Absolutely. Let me grab a couple comments if I can. RG says, liberty must prevail. I'm with you. I hope you are right. Absolutely. Joseph, I think, is on your side. Joseph says the unconstitutional suspension of our civil liberties. But I think what James is saying is that it's become constitutional, right? I mean, this is what you're saying, right? It's the suspension of our civil liberties. It's really no longer unconstitutional because they're making amendments. Isn't that what you're saying?
Well, it's more than just the amendments. A culture or a constitution only means something if people believe in it. I mean, otherwise, it's a piece of paper.
Right.
And I think we've reached the point where it's simply a piece of paper. And some things have happened along the way. You know, this growth in the size of government has made it seem like a piece of paper, because the government's at the point now where they can literally do anything they want. We saw that in 2020,
yes,
where almost overnight, millions of people were put out of their own businesses. Small businesses were told to shut down. We were locked in our homes. Kids couldn't go to school. You couldn't go to church. I mean, it was a stunning thing. And what surprised me the most is not necessarily that the government was inclined to do that, because I am afraid of our government, but the fact that people took it so easily.
Without even a blink. James, I live in New York. We took it. We were, thank you, sir. May I have another? That is what we were. All of a sudden, New Yorkers, I mean, the whole country, but heavily New Yorkers, woke up, and now we had to turn on the news or check our phones or check our computer whether or not we could go to work anymore, whether we could leave our homes. We had to ask the government if that was a thing. Yes, that's the worst part, right? We didn't fight back. And my governor now is doubling down on what he's saying. He literally said 2 weeks ago that his lockdowns might go as long as another 2 years. That's what he said. He's doubling down, and the sad part is most New Yorkers still support him.
Well, if you think about the Bill of Rights, which is one of the fundamental elements of our Constitution, the first 10 amendments, almost every one of those rights or amendments were violated in 2020 by our government.
Yes.
The right to religion? No, you can't go to church. The right to free speech? No, you can't gather. You can't even petition the government for redress. You could literally go one by one and see how, wow, we don't really have a constitution anymore. We have an imperial government, or even in the state of New York, like you mentioned, an imperial governor who is empowered literally to do anything, and the legislatures won't stop him, and the people are silent.
I remember George Carlin and the comic bit he did years ago. He said, in America, there are no rights. There are only privileges. And the government decides on whether you can have those privileges or not. And I laughed when he first said it. Now I'm crying because I think he was right? The joke that he said then, it's not a joke anymore. Let me grab a couple of more comments. I think we need 40 years of liberty-loving leadership to roll back these problems and instill those beautiful virtues and principles that we free-loving people espouse. It isn't just leadership, but I think you're right, but it is a cultural issue, right? We have to change the American culture.
Yeah, and that's a tremendously important point. And I have frustration in a lot of political discussions with people because they say, you know, we got to vote for this Republican or that Republican or whatever, or Trump. And it's not about that anymore, because the culture has shifted so dramatically that I'm going to make the point in a couple minutes that We're literally two different countries right now at a cultural level
Yeah.
to the core. And the way that's happened is in the last 50 to 60 years, we've imported a lot of European thought about the nature of government and more specifically a lean towards socialism that's infected our schools. And so our public education system, both in the high schools and the colleges, are pumping out generations now of students who don't believe in the Constitution anymore. They think it's a fundamentally unjust document written by old white men, 200 years ago, and it's oppressive and utterly irrelevant. They've adopted, the neo-Marxist perspective on all of this. And so you can pick any leader you want at this point, but until you change that trend of what's happening in our schools and being taught in our schools, we're just going to spit out a whole nother generation to come of people who think like that.
It's again, what you're saying. When people ask me, Larry, when you're out there talking to people, do you spend more time talking about libertarian principles, ideology? Do you talk about the libertarian movement, about liberty? And I say none of that. I talk about libertarian answers to people's questions, libertarian answers for their problems. Because to your point, if you just say, well, the Constitution says, the average American now says, so?
Yep.
They actually don't go, oh my God, we should look at it. They go, so? To your point.
Yeah, I've got a lot of political activist friends, and they're all very passionate, and they all want to go do something, or they want to go fix America and fix the world. And they always start the premise of their discussions with, yay Constitution and yay Founding Fathers, which I'm very sympathetic to because I think the Constitution was the greatest political document ever created at the time, and our Founding Fathers were some of the bravest men in history. They changed the world. But that's falling on deaf ears now.
Yes, it is.
There are two entire generations who care nothing about that Constitution. And so to your point, we need to speak a different language.
Yes.
To people.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. And that's what I'm trying to achieve. I'm trying to get people to hear that the answers that they've been told for generations haven't worked and aren't going to work. But there are answers that can work. And then when I know I'm winning is when a Democrat or Republican thinks I'm one of them. That's when I know I'm winning. Right? Mm-hmm. So a Democrat goes, oh, you must be a Democrat. Why? Because you agree with me or have good ideas. And of course, those evil Republicans would never have that idea, right? Or Republican goes, you must be Democrat. Why? I mean, you must be Republican. Why? Because Democrats wouldn't have a good idea. So that's when I know I'm winning. So I'm always trying to make it happen.
I think you're onto something there because even as I was writing this, my latest book, 2084 American Apocalypse, I had my own personal revelation because I had my own political biases going into writing it. But as I wrote it, I actually surprised myself. And I came away with the conclusion when I got done writing it, that this is really all about the elites versus everyone else.
Yes, and yes.
So this old paradigm of left versus right, conservative versus liberal, it's gone. It's no longer relevant, in my opinion, because what we have is an oligarchy or a duopoly, if you want to think about the Democrats and Republicans, in Washington that is aligned with some of the biggest businesses and some of the the biggest media, biggest social media, biggest educational institution leaders. They are all in this together, and their whole goal is to protect their elitist position and to make themselves richer. And it's all going to be borne on the backs of everyone else, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, a Libertarian, or I don't care what you are. But the battle right now is the elites versus everyone else.
Yes, and I mean, I'm loving what you're saying, because what I constantly see is whenever we try to fix a problem, the elites of the left and the right always shift us into culture war, right? So we're losing our freedoms. But what about trans people in bathrooms, right? Oh, what? But we're losing our freedoms. Yeah, but what about, these people who are doing that? But we're losing our freedoms. But what about marijuana, right? I mean, what about abortion? We always jump onto a culture war when we have to actually fix something. Now, trans people in bathrooms and abortions, and those are all issues we should deal with also. I'm not against dealing with those issues, but they shouldn't be number one when our country is collapsing. They should be much lower on the list of things to do. But if we keep throwing this up, I would argue that the two countries that you mentioned, two nations that we are, is heavily based upon culture, not actually desired outcomes. I think desired outcomes are very often the same desired outcome, but there's a culture war there that makes it almost impossible to even talk.
Yeah, I think that's true, because one of the things I do in my book is to try to get beyond ideology, like you're discussing now, and get down to the core of what does it mean to be a human being. Mm-hmm. And when you peel back all those layers of ideology, you get down to a core where we're all pretty much alike. I mean, we all want to love and be loved. We all want to be safe. We all want to have an opportunity to do what we enjoy and love in life. We all want to make life better. No one wakes up in the morning thinking, I want to make my life worse today. I mean, everybody wants to make their life better, and they want the freedom to do that. At a very basic level, we're all human beings, and we all have those same intrinsic interests and needs. And so you got to wonder, how do we end up with these ideological tensions in our society? It's really those ideological tensions that are tearing us apart.
Yes.
The left versus the right, they're all trying to find a way to demonize the other. We've even gotten to the point now where we have two different sets of facts and truth and data, and soon we'll have two different histories as we devour each other's histories.
Right.
My fear is, though, it's that cultural divide that's causing that runs very deep now. And I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, I wanted to go into that a little bit. But to your point, we stopped thinking about issues, and we've got something going on in our country that is way deeper than any of those issues, way deeper. And so when you think about, I'm going to talk about 5 basic things that would define our country. One of them is the concept of freedom. And so, there's one group, particularly the libertarians and sometimes the Republicans, who say we're the people of freedom. Well, everybody wants freedom. They just define it differently. And so, for instance, as a libertarian, I would just define freedom as I want to be protected from coercion and aggression by others.
Sure.
That's what I think freedom is. I want just, leave me alone. I want to go do my thing. Other people see it very differently. They want to be free from the necessities of life. FDR described it as, freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom from, whatever. They want the government to protect them from reality almost, to protect them from the entropy of being a living entity in the universe. So their freedom is, I want to be protected from those people who are going to make my life risky or dangerous, or are going to make me have to work hard. Versus my freedom, which is just leave me alone. I just want to go do my thing. But everybody wants freedom. But that cultural divide is very powerful in this country. Another one is, what's the primary role of government?
Sure.
Again, as a libertarian, I would look at it as, well, the primary role of government is to protect life and property. I mean, when you pare it down, that's why it exists. People enter into society to become safer, not less safe. But a lot of people now see government as a tool for imposing on others.
Oh, yes. That becomes the norm.
That they have this view of, well, I want the world to be this way, or I want to have this thing, or I think there's been this injustice done somewhere, or this needed to be fixed. So now I want to use so now the power of the state is used to impose on people. So it's no longer the protector of life and property. It's a force that's impositional. Another cultural divide that's tearing us apart is, what is the nature of responsibility in our society?
Yep.
As I was talking earlier,
turned upside down, my friend. That has been turned completely upside down.
Absolutely. When this country first started, it was very much a concept of, you're responsible for yourself, that you have obligations to not only take care of yourself, but to protect yourself and make your own life better. That's your responsibility. And in order to do that, you have to be a decent, upstanding person in the community, or you're not going to succeed at that. That's been turned on its head. And now your responsibility is not for yourself, it's for everyone else. By the way, everyone else but yourself. You're no longer responsible for you.
Or there's a point where I see it is that someone else is always responsible, not you.
Right.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons that we see a growth in government. There's many, but I think one of them at a personal level is, if it's government's responsibility or anything that's big, right? It's the corporate's responsibility. It's the government's responsibility. It's this. then it's not mine. Then I don't feel guilty. Then I'm safe. I'm better because it's not responsibility, it's theirs. I don't have to take on that. And I think we have encouraged that at the local level even.
Right. You said that perfectly. It's sort of a victim mentality that all these other external circumstances in the world are the cause of my misfortune, and I'm not the cause of my misfortune. But what happens in a collectivist state that tries to push that culture is that, well, you may not be responsible for yourself and you may be a victim, but everybody's responsible for everyone else. We're all in this together. And so you've given up your individual sovereignty in that bargain. And it's a terrible bargain to make, in my opinion. Another area where we've really separated ourselves as a country is in the concept of wealth creation. And, it used to be, and again, as a libertarian, I think wealth is a responsibility and a function of individual effort, risk taking, making the proper investments that you need to make, and sacrificing along the way in order to gain some wealth. There's a whole nother school of thought now that says, well, wealth somehow magically exists. It came into being over the course of the years, and probably some injustice occurred, and it was stolen by colonialists or by racial imperialists or whatever. But now that wealth somehow exists now, and the only function is how do we divide it up equitably? And those are two very different views of the world. That one sees the world as, I'm going to take that wealth simply because I think I deserve it, and there was some injustice done, versus someone saying, well, I'm going to go get that wealth simply by earning it, creating, inventing, and taking a risk. So when you go through those things I rattled off about freedom and what is the proper role of government, and the nature of responsibility and the nature of wealth creation, we're two very different countries right now.
But I really think, though, that you're right. We are different. But I think there's a middle ground that can be made if we go to the most important piece, which is nonviolence, right? Not forcing the other. The problem is most Democrats are afraid of Republicans. They think if Republicans get in charge, they'll force their will upon us. And most Republicans are afraid of Democrats because if Democrats get in charge, they'll enforce their will upon us. And they're basically correct. But if instead we had a world that said, look, if you want to be a collectivist or a socialist, all good. If you want to have companies that are run by all the workers, all good. Just don't make a law. Don't force me to join one of them. Don't force me to make my company that way. And if you think it's the right answer, go ahead. I hope you're successful and show us the right way. And we don't have that. We have your way is wrong or my way is wrong versus try what you think is going to work for you. I bring this up all the time. In a libertarian world, the Amish can survive and thrive, right? And they're a voluntary socialistic society. Enjoy, leave if you want to, don't, whatever, do your thing. But in a socialistic country, they can't. Every time you start a socialist or which becomes a totalitarian country, it is the smallest minorities that are always attacked, whether they're gypsies or Amish or in New York State, even Mormons. I mean, the Jews, obviously, in Europe. I mean, insert tribes in Africa, the Muslims in Burma. Every time that happens, it's a minority, right? But it's just the minority that we have in front of us. But in our world, libertarian world, the minorities can thrive any way they want to thrive. And if they know the right ways and we think they're right, we'll copy them.
We're in complete agreement on this one, because if you look at my website, my motto is neither coerce nor be coerced. And so you can build an entire society around that, and a very peaceful society and a very successful society, if you just accept that basic premise that allow people to live their lives as they see fit, as long as they don't trample on the similar right of others. Don't coerce other people, and don't let them coerce you. And that's the basis of a peaceful and prosperous society. The problem we have, though, is that violates all the principles of neo-Marxism. And so this neo-Marxist influence in our society right now, where, for instance, I said, what do you do with wealth? Do you either choose to create it individually, which if you're in a non-coercive society, that is the only path. You go out and you earn your living, and you trade fairly with other people, and you bring value to a marketplace, and in exchange you get value back. I mean, that's what a cooperative, collaborative civilization does. Neo-Marxists don't think like that. They think, I'm simply going to take it. I didn't earn it. but I believe because of some historical injustice or because of some concept of equity, it's mine, even though I didn't create it or earn it. I'm simply going to take it. In doing so, that implies violence. I mean, nobody's going to just say, yeah, here, take my stuff.
Yeah, but there's another part to that, right? The average American doesn't see, and I mean the average, not me or you, I think we're on the same page, but the average American doesn't see government as violence, right? In fact, if you ask the average American, well, we're going to take taxes. Well, the government's going to take taxes. Yeah, and if you don't pay, there's going to be violence. No, it's okay. We voted on it, so it's not violence. No, it's government, so it's not violence. Now, I know to you and I, that doesn't make any sense. But to, I think, many Americans, that is really how they think. They think it's not violence because we voted on it. It's not violence because it's government. Therefore, it's not violence.
Well, that's where this discussion about what's happened to our Constitution is vital regarding this point. Because the whole premise of the Constitution was that majority does not rule, that there are certain fundamental rights, the protection of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that accrue to sovereign individuals, and there's no government or majority that can trample those. Well, what's happened in our country now is we've switched over from that concept of individual sovereignty to the concept of majority rule, that essentially, to your point, whatever people voted for is now right. It's now moral. It's now correct. And if that means trampling on some individuals and taking their property or limiting their rights, so what? We voted for it.
We voted for it.
In my opinion, that's neither a moral society, that is neither a desirable society, and it is absolutely going to be a violent society. And that's where we're at.
Let me grab a couple more comments. Sean says, once people have blatant disrespect for the institutions that govern us, a country is doomed. It's the people who run them at fault for our problems, not the actual institutions. I think there's some truth to that. I think we have to have some respect for our courts and things like that. Otherwise, why would you? So many people wouldn't want to enforce their contracts and such. I think there is something to that. The question, I think, in my view at least, is what are we considering an institution, right? Just because we've had it for a while doesn't mean we should have it, right? Taxation, income tax is now an institution. The IRS is an institution. I'm not happy about that one, right? So I'm not sure all of them, can we put them all together?
Well, the surveillance state is now an institution.
Oh, well said. Yes, absolutely.
Is that good? I don't think so. I think that's going to a tremendous opportunity to violate everyone's life and liberty. It's a historical fact that the National Socialist Party in Germany was voted into power. Yep. They were democratically elected.
I say it all the time. Yep.
The fact that they were chosen as leaders doesn't give them any moral sanction for what they did. Things are either right or wrong. And one of the beauties of our Constitution was that we had a compact as a civilization that said, this is fundamentally right in our society. It doesn't matter what majority rises up to say, I'm going to vote for this or vote for that. There are certain things that we have said are sacred to us as individuals in our society. And we've lost that. And that's the downfall of our country right now. It's not which leader did we pick or even what our institutions are doing right now. It's the fact that we've surrendered the sovereignty of the individual to the whim of majority rule.
Here we go. Well, you got a fan in John. John says, great guest, Larry. So you got a fan.
Well, thank you.
So there we go. Well, if you want more about James, please head over to jameskeena.com to check out what he's doing over there. If you want to, of course, please like, comment, and share. And guys, if you like the people I'm bringing aboard, then do me a favor, support the show. Head over to patreon.com/sharpeway. If you can throw me $10 so I can keep doing this, I'd appreciate it. If you can do it, I would love that. That keeps the show going. You know it's going. Every day I keep rocking and rolling. I'm keep showing up. So help me out if you can. And of course, to make my sponsor happy, the Advocates, they have a new test, the Election Integrity Survey. It's in the link. If you look in the show description, click on that link, take that survey and share it. Let people know what you think about the election. Where do you stand with others in our country? Take that, make my sponsors happy, make me happy. Please go ahead and do that. I appreciate that. So let me keep moving if I can. Let's see. Tom says, save me from the people who would save me from myself. They have muscles for brains, gang of four. So thank you for that, Tom. I appreciate that. That's good. Pete says, we have to stop believing that the old parties are going to become our saviors. They aren't. I'm with you completely.
Well,
Go ahead, James.
I am too. And, for many years, I was part of the Tea Party movement, and many in our group wanted to make themselves part of the Republican Party and somehow convince the Republican Party to get back to its roots and protect our basic rights and our individual sovereignty. I was always skeptical, but it was the group I was running with, so I helped them out for about 10 years now. But I have to say I'm at the point where I don't believe either of the two major parties, is going to lead us to the promised land here. And I think what happened with Trump, it's an interesting phenomenon in my mind. I'm not a big Trump fan personally. I don't think he was all that wise. I don't think he had some great, wisdom and solution to our country, but he was very perceptive. And he saw a budding alliance in our society that I think both major parties were ignoring, and that there was a large group of people in our society who were feeling left out by these two elitist parties.
Yes.
And I think Trump tapped into that. And that's not because he's some great philosopher or anything. He just saw it for what it was. And I think that's the legacy he's going to have. It's not like, hey, we're all Trumpists now, or Trump's our savior. No, he pointed out to us, hey, there's a different group, an alliance in our society that shifted from that old left-right Democrat Republican paradigm. And in my opinion, it's a golden opportunity for the Libertarian Party to, if they see it properly and can tap into it properly, to make some huge inroads here.
Oh no, we're not. I'm trying to, but they're not. but I'm trying. I'm doing my best. But no, the party's not. That's fine. I appreciate that. I do. Jonathan says, if we can regard Lincoln as well-intentioned, we can regard FDR as well-intentioned. Not a stretch I would take. Powerful men are not stupid. The law and morality are not beyond their scope. So I think what Jonathan's saying is he's not sure that they're both well-intentioned. My opinion on that is I don't think every president was well-intentioned, but I do think most were. I think most did what they thought was right for the country, even though they did that. And the best example I can give in my lifetime, I think, is Jimmy Carter. I think Jimmy Carter was not a very good president, but I don't think he's a bad person. I think he was doing what he thought was right for the country, and he made tons of mistakes and didn't do well. But my opinion, and I don't know this, my feeling is he wasn't trying to hurt anybody. He was a guy who was out of his depth and was trying to do what he thought was right. I think Lincoln was too, but to your point, Jonathan, I'm not sure FDR thought that. I don't know. James, do you have an opinion either way?
Well, I think a lot of our leaders get stuck in the exigencies of their times. And, Lincoln had a country that was fragmenting. I mean, the South literally seceded from the Union. And I think he had some sincerity in his passion for keeping the Union together. I think he believed in the United States of America, and I think he believed in its concepts. And I think he was passionate about solving the problem of slavery. So I give him credit for those two motives. But the way he went about it was absolutely brutal. If you read the history of what Lincoln did and his violations of civil rights at that time, including taking journalists and imprisoning them on an island in New York, I mean, he violated every norm of society in order to accomplish his two missions. He accomplished them at great cost to the country. Over 500,000 people died, which, by the way, that's more people died in the American Civil War than Americans died fighting all of the other wars combined in our history. It was a violent, brutal affair, and Lincoln was a part of that violence and brutality. But
what about FDR, though? Go down to FDR and Carter and whatever. I mean, Bush was the one who put together the surveillance state more than anybody. I mean, what about those guys? You think they were doing it? You think they believed they were doing the right thing, or do you think there was some kind of nefariousness or not caring or something there? What does your gut tell you?
Well, I think all human beings are fallible, and I think any leader who gets to the point of being the president of the United States has probably compromised his morals and his purity of vision somewhere along the way to get there. FDR, again, was in a bit of a tough spot, a little bit like Lincoln, where the world was going through a terrible depression. There was the march of communism going on, not only in the Soviet Union, where it was a fact, but all over Europe. You were starting to see the rise of it in Germany and other places.
There's street fighting in Germany at that point.
Right. I think FDR looked at that and said, I probably have to meet them halfway somehow. That, you know,
Okay.
in the terror of the Great Depression and the fact that you have this onrushing revolt by humanity against a lot of the institutions of humanity coming from the Marxists, he probably said, you know, I have to make some concessions here, and we have to make some adjustments to our society in order to stop that. So I think he made the right decisions. My opinion is no. I think he again propagated the growth of government, and in the long run, that's going to be a bad thing for us. But
I would agree.
In some respects, I can see why he did what he did at the time.
Look at that. See, we're being good, guys. Connie says, yep, the government tells you what you can grow, charges to hunt and fish, basically interfering with feeding our own families. It's beyond ridiculous. Yes, and we take it, Connie. Absolutely. Paul says the government is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually we will be a totalitarian government. Please, Paul, I hope you're wrong, unless people realize the danger and there's significant pushback. But that's kind of what you're talking about now, isn't it, James? I mean, this is what you see in the future, right? Using your crystal ball, you see a pushback, right, or no?
Well, I do see a pushback, because what can't go on forever won't go on forever. And there is a certain point where people, you know, they'll take a certain amount of abuse from any direction, you know, whether it's in a relationship or even from your government, because people tolerate stability, they tolerate tradition, they tolerate, hey, I just want to get along to the next day kind of mentality. But at some point, that becomes so oppressive that people put down their tools and they pick up their guns. That happens. It's happened everywhere in the world. Even in the Soviet Union, you know, there was a reaction against the Marxist revolution there, and it became very violent. In Eastern Europe, it became very violent. That violence is not like old history, you know, where you got to pick up a book from 2,000 years ago. This is stuff that's happened in our lifetime.
Right, sure.
And we can't say we're immune from it. And when you have a government in the year 2020 that literally, in my opinion, announced itself as a totalitarian government. I mean, they tell us it's not permanent. Maybe not. I'd like to think it isn't, but it doesn't seem to be going away.
It hasn't happened yet. So I mean, do they ever give back power? I don't remember it ever happening.
Well, no, to the point one of your viewers made in the comment there, I made a bet with someone about 10 years ago when we were debating who was going to be president. And I said, you know, it doesn't matter, because after the next 4 years, whoever wins the presidency, the government's budget is going to be bigger. There's going to be more regulations than before. There's going to be more taxes than before, and we're going to have less freedom than before. And I don't care who wins the election. That will be the result after 4 years. I've never been wrong in that prediction.
Yes, it's funny. I said all the time, people got mad at me. They said, Larry, why didn't you either get all in behind Trump or get all against Trump and get behind Biden? I was like, because either way I was going to be in trouble. I'm trying to vote for the future. I wanted a libertarian future. So I voted libertarian, and I was hoping others would follow me. Clearly not enough did. But I was hoping more would follow me to grow for a libertarian future, because I agree with your point completely.
Yeah, and I think, as we were discussing a little bit earlier, I think Trump has identified a group of people. I don't want to call them in the middle, because it almost seems like they're between the right and the left. And in my opinion, they're not. They're just a group of people who want to live their lives. They want to work hard. They want to be peaceful. They don't want to go off to a foreign war somewhere. They don't want the government in their bedroom. They don't want the government in their wallets. They just want to go live their life. They want to work hard, and they want to make things better than they were before for themselves and their loved ones. I think there's actually a rather large group of people in the United States who would fall into that category. But right now, neither party's servicing them, neither of the main parties. Yeah. And I think whether it's the Libertarian Party or some other group, if they can target that group and energize them and give that group a vision and a hope, I think there's some future there.
I am with you 100%. So let's see. Hold on, if I can grab this. Another one, if I can. You got a bunch of stuff here. Do you think there can be a war on the military-industrial complex? That's not a bad idea. I like that. Kind of trying to get rid of the military-industrial complex. The problem is it's a big jobs creator, right? The military-industrial complex is a massive jobs program. That's a concern.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, it used to be in the 50s when that term came up that it was the military-industrial complex, and that's where a lot of the money of the federal government went.
Yeah.
But when you look at the situation now, it's far bigger than just the military-industrial complex. If you
Yes.
look at the social media magnates and all those big companies, they are now essentially in bed with the government.
Yes.
When you look at the education establishment, it's essentially in bed with the government. When you look at the big media, it's essentially in bed with the government. So
Yeah.
it's not just the military-industrial complex anymore. It's all of these elites have conspired against everyone else.
Absolutely. Paula says we need a competitive third party to facilitate cultural change. I agree. I would love that to happen. And it doesn't have to be even big. I mean, in my view, if the libertarian movement just was able to get 5% of any, house, any legislature, we could be the swing vote. We could be the swing vote and the bridge that would have us communicate and talk. And every issue wouldn't have to be a wedge issue. I'm hoping for that still.
Well, I hope for that too. And I think one lever that is going to have to happen, and maybe the only lever that's really going to make it happen, is we have to privatize schools. And by that I mean that the money has to follow the student and not the system.
Absolutely.
And if you can empower parents and students to be able to pick the school they go to and the culture that school brings to their child, I think you will start the movement of a fundamental cultural change in America.
I agree. Connie jumps on board with that. She goes, yep, it's being spun that way in schools. It's the indoctrination of our nation. I wish you were wrong, Connie, but I see it. I have 2 school-age kids. One is 16 and one is 10. And I see it. They come back home to me and tell me stuff. And I'm like, really? Wow. We go through history lessons. And like my kids will be, in late elementary school, and they won't know the 3 branches of government. I will have to teach to them because they don't know. I'm teaching this stuff to them.
It's a frightening thing. I've got 8 kids, so I've seen a lot of them go through the public school systems. But one of them we homeschooled for a while, but we used the curriculum that had been established by the State Board of Education to do the homeschooling. And it was the same curriculum used in the public schools where kids go to school. But it was frightening to watch your student go through that curriculum because it was a very anti-American curriculum. And we got a very good look at it because every day
you're doing it.
We were somewhat obligated to show it to our child because that's the curriculum he was using. And we told him a very different story as we were going along, that there's a different America and a different perspective on it. But it really opened my eyes to what's being taught in our public schools. It's frightening.
Absolutely. Sam says, now that we know we can impeach former presidents, it is time to impeach FDR and Truman. Who cares if they're dead? There we go. Dig up their corpses and sit them in the Senate for their trial. And he puts in their sarcasm. He's obviously teasing. But it's a point, though, isn't it? I mean, do we want to? And I guess we kind of did it just now. We were talking about the past, but I think what we just did is we talked about FDR, not in a way to go, FDR is a terrible person. We hate him. Terrible. We spoke about what we thought he might have been going through and thinking, even though in both of our eyes, what he did was wrong. Yeah. I wish more people would do that.
Yeah. And I think the dialogue has to happen at a lower level. I mean, we can vilify an FDR, we can vilify a Clinton, we can vilify a Trump, but the truth is America's not talking anymore.
Yes.
Our social medias have gone 2 separate ways. Our mainstream medias have gone 2 separate ways. And even in groups, I mean, we're starting to become very tribalized, and that happens naturally when truth starts to die, and it's hard to tell what truth is anymore. When truth starts to die, people rally to their tribal mentalities. And we're seeing a ton of that right now. We've all just gone to our tribal corners, and we're going to duke it out. And we can wait for, like we were talking earlier, the big superstar leader to come along and save us all. But, at some point, we got to get down to it ourselves.
Absolutely. William says America's gone. William, I hope you're wrong. I got some downers here today, James. I'm sorry. Controlled by elite bankers after the Civil War / bankrupt, the country was sold out. The country was sold out. I think that's true. But I'm hoping in my heart that there's still a chance to save us. And maybe it's possible that I'm naive. And it's possible that I'm just an optimist. But if so, so what? I want to save our country.
Well, I do too. That's probably why I wrote the book. I mean, it sounds a little bit pessimistic with the title, 2084 American Apocalypse. But I wrote it as a warning to the American people that this is where we're headed. And so we've got some time, I think, to unravel it. But I don't think you're going to get there by again, waiting for the savior. This concept that the bankers have taken over, I actually agree with. I think that's part of this. That's actually the heart of this elitism that is running our country, is the banking
Yes,
cartels. I agree with that completely. But there's not that many of them, and we way outnumber them.
that's
And
true.
we are the producers in this society. And at some point, if we organize ourselves properly, we can put an end to this.
I love it. Adrian says she quotes the band The Smiths. I actually had this album. I did. Shows you how old I am. I am human and I want to be loved just like everyone else does. Yes, James, what you were saying. See, the Smiths knew what you were talking about. I appreciate that. It's true. When we realize that we're all just humans, things begin to change, right? I think things begin to change. David says, I think without having a true free market for healthcare where we can negotiate prices or have diverse has driven people left. As far as economic restrictions have created more poverty, the minimum wages made things go up, has driven people left, unfortunately. I think I know where David's going with this. I think he's saying the way things are happening, people are moving left almost out of desperation because the left's rhetoric is far better than the right's rhetoric. Yeah. The left's rhetoric is all about love and equality and help and free stuff. Yep. So the rhetoric is great. I think David's right. If you're desperate and feeling bad, the left sounds like a good idea.
Well, it's an interesting paradox, and Herbert Spencer pointed this out, that once government takes over the responsibility for something, even when it fails, people will tend to plead for more government to fix it. Yes. Whatever collateral damage it created, they're going to say, well, now I need even more government because I got to fix this collateral damage, that collateral damage, this imbalance, this imperfection. And it just steamrolls from there, that once you go down that path of the government is the solution, every solution the government implements is going to be flawed and have collateral damage, which means you're going to clamor for even more government to fix that, if that's the path you're going to go down. And it's a terrible path.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you, James, before we wrap this up, I've held you here for about an hour. Is there anything that we should be talking about that we didn't? Did I miss something you want to bring up or touch upon?
Well, I think the point I was trying to make earlier about there's a fairly big group in our society that actually thinks like, to your viewer who brought up the band The Smiths, and, I just want to be loved by someone. I think there are people who just want to live their lives. They do want to love and be loved. And that's the group that has to rally here. It's not the ideological factions that are going to punch each other senseless. It's that group of people who just want to live their lives and do it peacefully, do it fairly, and do it justly. That's the group that we've got to rally here.
I love that. Guys, for more on James, head over to James Keena. That's KEENA.com. Check him out, what he's doing. I'm glad he came by. As always, after you're done watching this, like, comment, and share. Let people know. And if you like what I'm doing, then head on over to patreon.com/Sharpeway. Throw me $10. Show me how much you love me, because I know you do. Please do that. And as always, help out my sponsors. Click on that. Click on the link for the election integrity survey in the description. Take that test and share it around. Make everybody happy. James will say thank you so much for coming today. Everybody else, thank you so much for watching. I will see you all tomorrow. And by the way, tomorrow I have a local Democrat in the show who's running for New York City Council. It'll be a great show. I will see you guys all